Hey, so now we're going to look at the anatomy of a nephron, just the cell. Remember, I think I don't remember what chapter it is. We did the cell, all the different parts of the cell, the mitochondria, and all of that. In this case, we're doing a similar thing with the anatomy of the nephron. We're going to start from here. This portion, so this whole thing is one nephron, right? This portion is called the Bowman's capsule. It almost looks like if you put both your hands together and like join them at the wrist and kind of hold them together, kind of looks like a cup. So this is the Bowman's capsule. The inside here is the glomerulus. The glomerulus is primarily where the filtration takes place. You have the renal artery. This is a renal artery, the red one. It brings oxygenated blood. This is your renal vein. It takes the deoxygenated blood back to the heart. From the Bowman's capsule, you're going into what's called the proximal tubule. Tubule meaning tube. So inside is epithelial tissue. Outside is connective tissue. It's a lumen. It's a hole. So it's proximal meaning close. Tubule meaning tube. This is a peritubular capillaries. So let's kind of go into cardiovascular system. When the blood flows from the heart, it goes through arteries. From arteries, it goes into smaller, it branches out into smaller arterioles. And then when it has to go into an organ, it has to go into a different cell. It has to go into a different location. Basically, it's done via a thin layer of capillaries. They're very, very fine tubules made out of simple epithelial tissue. So there is a direct diffusion. Think about semi-permeable. So there's a direct diffusion, and it's a capillary bed. So something like this, like you can see where, this part here where you see that's not the capillaries, but you can, this little, they're so thin, their walls are so thin that they can diffuse through them. This is the distal tubule, far tubule. And then you have, the distal tubule. Stupid me. The distal tubule is here. It comes in here. This joins in. And then this is the collecting duct. This portion from here to this corner is called the loop of Henle. There is a descending limb, a limb that's going downwards, an ascending limb, a limb that's going upwards. So blood comes in, goes through the filtration, and it goes down the proximal tubules. There's different types of reabsorption and secretion that happens, goes into the descending limb of the loop of Henle, then around the ascending loop of the loop of Henle, goes around and then goes back in and then out through the distal, then this way, and then goes through into the distal tubule, goes into the distal tubule, enters the collecting tubule, and then leaves. There are two different types of arterioles. Remember when I talked about arteries become smaller and they're called arterioles? From smaller arterioles, then they become capillary beds. They become So artery, arterioles, capillaries, veins, venules, and capillaries. Capillaries are usually, you'll see it. Let me kind of try to draw it out, okay? So if you think about it this way, you'll see it almost like a mesh. On one side, it's going to be red, little mesh of red. On the other side, it's going to be, can I change the color on this? Pen color, yes. On the other side, it's going to be like this blue thing. So it's kind of going to connect like that. That's a horrible drawing, but you understand what I'm saying. So you'd have, oops, that should be red. I'll do it this side. So you're going to have venules. So there'll be many venules here, and they all will connect into one giant vein right there. If it was an artery, you would have pen colors, red. So you'd have, these would be arterioles, right? And there'll be a bunch of arterioles here, and all these arterioles will connect into one large artery. And blood would flow this way, then branch up and go into this, and and this, and then branch again. This would be a capillary bed. Capillary bed. I'm not writing the whole word capillary there. That would be this area, would be the capillary bed. So the next one is when we talk about afferent meaning coming into. Afferent arterioles is blood going into the glomerulus capsule, and efferent arterioles meaning leaving. So this is blood from the glomerulus capsule. This is blood. Efferent is to the glomerulus capsule. So just to recap the anatomy, you have the glomerulus. Within the glomerulus is the Bowman's capsule. The Bowman's capsule is where filtration takes place. From there, it goes into the proximal tubule, down the proximal tubule. It goes into the descending limb of the loop of Henle, ascending limb of the loop of Henle. This whole structure here is called the loop of Henle. From there into the distal tubule, through the distal tubule, and into the collecting duct. This area is called vasa recta. Vasa recta is a capillary bed that kind of spreads along the loop of Henle. I hope this is clear, and this was the capillary bed. Oops. This is just another view of it. I obviously cannot play the movie. So let's look at what happens at each level. So before we do anything, let me talk about what an interstitial fluid is. An interstitial fluid, it basically contains water, a lot of ions. There is a lot of transcellular fluids. One of the main components in it is plasma. So blood gets its red color because of the red blood cells. Interstitial fluid is kind of whitish, transparent, translucent, not transparent, almost. When you have like an edema, like when you're flying and then you're like feet, your knees are swollen, or you have just this swelling in different parts of your area and it's filled with a fluid, that fluid is interstitial fluid. Interstitial fluid is basically between tissues. I think in the previous videos we talked about the levels of organizations. Tissue is when a couple of cells come together and form a tissue. Interstitial fluid kind of flows between, so if you kind of in that area between the tissue is what it flows. It does not contain red blood cells. It's a part of the lymph system rather than the red blood cell system. So filtration, blood is coming in, there's filtration. There's filtration, blood's coming in, and now in this case, everything that is proteins and all of that stuff has been pulled out. Anything that's glucose based, unless there's a heavy concentration of glucose, because you have diabetes, all of that is pulled out. It goes through, again, if you remember, this is the proximal tubule. In the proximal tubule, mostly water is reabsorbed, so you're pulling out water. This, as you go along, water is pulled out. Most of the water is going into the interstitial fluid again. Remember, this whole thing is interstitial fluid. Most of the water is being reabsorbed into the interstitial fluid. Again, there is a reason for this to happen. If you have too much water in your system because you've been drinking 8 gallons of water every day, this is not going to go in this direction. It's just going to stay in the tubule. Otherwise, the body requires water, so it's going to pull out whatever it needs. This is a very passive transport. That means it's basic diffusion. There's more water, higher concentration of water here over water in this area, so water is just moving. Osmosis, basic osmosis. Descending loop of Henle, ascending loop of Henle. In the ascending loop of Henle, as you can notice, sodium chloride is to a certain extent passively pumped out. It's passively pumped out because there's more sodium chloride here versus sodium chloride there, so the ions just move outwards, and then as it goes along the tubule into the distal tubule, it has to be actively pumped out. Sodium chloride, again, these are conditional. If you are a kind of person whose diet is heavily based on nothing but chips, this is going to go in the opposite direction because the body needs to get rid of it. If your diet is, you're like someone who eats watermelons 24/7, then this water is not going to be reabsorbed because your body already has enough of it. So it's very conditional. You're noticing the exact same thing as it goes down the collecting tubule. In the collecting tubule, you're also noticing kind of these arrows that are a little misleading. Some of the urea goes in and out, and I'll talk about urea more in detail as we go along. This is a little misleading, but the urea actually goes down this way. It's picked, the collecting tubule has it, it pushes it out into the interstitial fluid, picks it up here, and then goes back and has to be pushed out. Excuse me. Urea under no circumstance is kept by the body. The body has no use for it. It is a byproduct of breaking down of proteins and nucleic acids, so it needs to be flushed out. It can actually end up being toxic. Who has a longer loop of Henle, a beaver or a desert hare? The loop of Henle in the previous slide you noticed is a place where water is reabsorbed. A major portion of it is where water is reabsorbed. Desert hare needs to actually reabsorb a lot of water because there is a scarcity of water. Hence, the desert rabbit is going to have a longer loop of Henle than the beaver. The beaver lives really close to water, hence replenishing the water that has been lost in the form of urine or sweat or any other mechanism is not that much of a problem as much as it would be for the hare. So the loop of Henle is essentially reabsorbing water. So any animal that lives in a place that has a scarcity of water will have a longer loop of Henle. Oh, why? Oh, that's cute. My dog loves to kill them, so not that cute. I think it's cutting off the screen. This is basically a vampire bat. The vampire bat has a very, very unique excretory system. Its food essentially is blood. So the vampire bat has these little fangs. It latches, and its blood is essentially mammal blood. So it latches onto an animal and sucks for about 20 minutes, and it can actually consume its own weight in blood. So if it weighs about 2 pounds, which it doesn't, it can take out 2 pounds of blood from your body. Not your body, I'm talking about cows, and it's found in Mexico and stuff like that. It has a very interesting, its saliva is pretty interesting. It has a painkiller, so it kind of numbs, almost like Lanacaine, and it kind of numbs that area. And its saliva is an anticoagulant, so it does not allow the blood to clot. So if you're bit by a vampire bat, besides the fact that you'll get rabies, you'll continue to bleed for a long time because it does not allow your blood to form a clot. So what it does is it sucks in the blood. The blood goes through the urinary tract system first, and all the water and the plasma, which the bat doesn't use, is peed out immediately. So while it is consuming the blood, it's also peeing out all the water part of the blood, and it's kind of becomes this pellet. Blood has formed materials like lymphocytes, platelets, red blood erythrocytes, and all of these things, the formed materials. It consumes the formed material, then goes into the digestive system. So pay attention. Makes a hole, spreads like a painkiller, then an anticoagulant. Starts sucking the blood goes into the excretory system, the urinary tract system. The water is peed out immediately, forms this pellet of formed materials, then goes into the digestive system. It is a mammal with the weirdest evolutionary pattern. It can feed for 20 minutes at a time, and at 20 minutes at a time, it will also start peeing at the same time that it's feeding. That is an ugly looking animal. Micturition is basically the elimination of pee from the body, the elimination of urine from the body. If you remember, I talked about the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder basically so that's your urinary bladder. There are two sphincters through the urethra. This is the urinary bladder. This is the urethra. There's a sphincter right here. There's a sphincter right here. With adults and infants, basically it becomes an involuntary reflex because they cannot control this sphincter, which is voluntary, as effectively. Again, infants and adults. Sometimes it becomes involuntary also when you're like laughing and stuff like that.